Good evening. Hi, welcome to this session of your conversation club. We have to do this time because of time constraints. But let's get started. Tonight we're going to start on a few techniques that we can do during the conversation clubs to help our learners develop even further their speaking skills. We are going to be exploring a few expressions that can memorize, as well as activities that you can do in order to give them more opportunities to practice this. So let's get started. How we can help our students develop their speaking skills. So, students normally think that the ability to speak a language is a product of language learning. Not necessarily. We have witnessed a lot of students that have spent a lot of time in a classroom and they still can't produce anything. Perhaps it is a lack of confidence, or perhaps it's really that they can't manipulate the vocabulary they have acquired. But we know that speaking is a crucial part of the language learning process and is a skill that needs to be developed. Like they say in everything, practice makes perfect. But how can we do this, or how can we change a little bit the student's perception? It all starts with us, actually. How can we help our students then? Well, if we are considered effective instructors, we can teach our students speaking strategies in the classroom. These are, for example, minimal responses that we are going to evaluate a bit further. We could also train them to recognize scripts. That means prefabricated expressions that they can actually identify and use, and using language to talk about language. This can be achieved by really grading the tasks and tasks with a communicative purpose. If you remember, these tasks with a communicative purpose are those that have a negotiation of meaning. It could be also through games and role plays, but then you will need to have a structure in order for them to follow. That way, they're going to expand their knowledge of the language and also build up their confidence in using the language. But actually, then it has to start with us. We have to develop this in the classroom or in the conversation club now that we have that tool for them to use at school. And with the centers or the self-access centers that are in every area. But let us remember what speaking really is. Speaking involves three areas of knowledge. If we start identifying these three areas, it will be the first one, using the right words in the right order with the correct pronunciation, that is mechanics. And let's make a parenthesis here. Sometimes we tend to ignore pronunciation mistakes because maybe we don't know how to correct them, or because we don't want to stop the students, but we actually need to have room during our feedback session or in our feedback time to correct the pronunciation of the students, so that also will enhance their fluency. Students also need to be aware that in order to know the clarity of the message, and they need to be sort of like precise, the precise understanding is not required. They need to learn functions. Functions, as you remember, are those prefabricated expressions. It could be lexical or grammatical, in order to perform something that they can do, like a survival thing, a survival skill. For example, if they will need to perform the function of apologizing, they will say, I'm sorry, I'm deeply sorry, I didn't mean to. So those expressions are going to help them fulfill the function of apologizing. Another area of speaking involves understanding how to take into account who is speaking to whom, in what circumstances, about what, and for what reason. This basically would include the register, whether it is a formal setting or an informal setting, and also a lot of the body language. So students need to be aware of the social and cultural rules and norms in the area they're going to be communicating. Mostly they will do this in the classroom, but in future they will have to do it where they're working or at the institutions they will be studying, and they really need to be aware that there are certain circumstances that will require them to be very formal or informal or just neutral. We need to explain our students that the goal of our speaking conversation classes or these conversation clubs is to help them develop their efficiency or how to communicate efficiently. We need to be aware as well as instructors that we have to use balanced activities to fulfill these tasks. What we need to know is that we need to have language input, that is, the vocabulary that we are going to be recycling. In other words, the warm up, or if we are going to be checking the simple present, that we start the task by refreshing the students about the simple present or the language that they have to use. The structure output is basically how the task is going to be divided. If first they have to write ideas, or if they have to rehearse, or if they have to prepare a role play, that would be the structure to follow, sort of like the process. And then the communicative output. Remember, in activities that has a negotiation of meaning, we need to be very strict with the amount of time they're going to take and also with the turns. At some stages, students don't like speaking activities so much because they feel other people speak more or that they really don't have a chance to communicate their ideas. So we need to teach them also strategies to negotiate their participation or how they're going to exchange long terms and short terms. So that is the communicative output. Remember, the activities that serve this purpose better are going to be the ones with an information gap. That means a student has the information that the other student lacks and vice versa, and this way they need to communicate in order to fulfill the task. But what can you do as a conversation club coach or tutor? Well, you have to be aware of the use of the minimal responses as we mentioned earlier, because minimal responses are predictable and they are idiomatic phrases that conversation participants use to indicate understanding, agreement, doubt, and other responses to what another speaker is saying. If we prepare our students with a stock of these responses, will enable them to focus on what the other participant is saying, and they will not have to worry about how to plan a response. In other words, we are teaching them to gain time, and by having these responses ready mechanically, they will be able to prepare their responses more effectively, and they don't have to think about how to approach these ideas. The only thing they have to learn better afterwards is how to fight for a turn, or how to hold their turn, or like they say in English, how to hold the floor in order to finish their contribution. So we have to teach these minimal responses, but let's see what are minimal responses then. Minimal responses are actually the expressions that are short but ready to use. According to Michael Lewis, this is going to be helping learners develop automaticity. They will not have to think about the question or about the answer because it will be just coming out automatically. So, for example, if we want to agree about or agree with what someone has said, we can just say, absolutely, yes, that's right. Or if we want to indicate that we are really not certain about what the other person is saying, then we just say, really? Are you sure? If we want to agree to cooperate with an idea, then we say, of course, okay, or sorry, I can't, I'm afraid not. If I want to start a new sentence and I want to express an opinion, then I say, oh, well, that's nice. Oh, how lucky. Oh, that's too bad. If I want to show that I am interested and if I want the other speaker to continue because that moment I have nothing to say, then we just help the speaker to go a little bit further on their turn, and then we say, what happened next? Oh, that's really interesting. What did you do? By doing this, I am at the same time fulfilling this social cultural thing because I'm listening attentively and I'm demonstrating to the speaker that I am paying attention and that I am still following whatever he's saying. So once again, these expressions are short and it will help the students to develop their automaticity. So in sum of this previous information, just remember, authentic communication involves an information gap. Each participant needs to have a task, and in their task, they need to have information that the other one does not have. In addition to this, to achieve the purpose of the task, the participants may have to clarify their meaning or ask for confirmation of their own understanding. By using what? You're right, the minimal responses. So let's try to incorporate these minimal responses as much as we can in our activities at the conversation clubs, so then it becomes an automatic process. Another thing that we can do is teach our students to use hedges. Hedges are not necessarily lexical expressions or grammatical expressions, but they are more like fillers or pointers in a conversation. For example, when you say, I think, perhaps, like, etc., that means you're paying attention, but you are holding the floor because you're not ready to speak yet. But obviously you have to believe in this, otherwise it will not sound convincing. There is a cultural note here. In real communication in the workplace, it is claimed that women use this more than men. I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to teach this more to girls in your conversation classes, but it's just, to be aware that maybe the women may have the need to use more hedges and sentence fillers than men. Because it is perceived also as a level of uncertainty, and the men actually don't use this as much as women. So just a cultural note to be aware that maybe women will have more need to use hedges and sentence fillers. We have been discussing about turn taking, short turns, long turns. Culturally, we need to be aware that there are ways of interrupting a person when they're speaking. We cannot just go and steal their idea or interrupt the momentum of a conversation. We need to be prepared to interrupt a person and to do it in the best way and to keep also the level of formality. So turn taken happens not only in oral conversations. I mean, also when you are in a conference via Skype or you are in a WhatsApp, now that we have all this technology, we might have also need to be aware of turn taking. Turn taking exists to bring order in a conversation and also to have the separation of ideas clear. However, sometimes it's difficult to know what to say when we have to interrupt a person. There are clues that we can use, but there are also facial expressions or gestures that I can use in order to have the other person look at us and say, okay, now is my time to speak. But let's see what expressions we can teach our students in order to achieve this purpose. Like we say, turn taking is really important, but we need to teach our students how to compete formally for a turn. Otherwise, they will never have a chance to communicate their ideas, and they will end up by having a very short turn, and the dominant student in a room or in a class will actually practice more. So we really need to prepare our students to compete for their turn. So they have to do it smoothly, politely, and appropriate. And we have to teach them that this can be achieved with using specific phrases, by using gestures and other body language. Sometimes it would be a movement of the hand, or maybe a movement of the head, or perhaps even the eyes, or by putting a finger in your face. It varies according to the culture and also to the age of the person. By using noises like humming and that is the humming and ahing while thinking, so as not to lose the turn. By doing this, that means that you're paying attention and you're ready to fight for your turn. Or maybe you can achieve this by speaking a certain way, using intonation to show that you have or haven't finished, and very quickly saying just at the beginning of your sentence to interrupt. So this way, you are going to be preparing your students to achieve this very important communication strategy that is going to help them interrupting or holding the floor so their ideas are not turned off or sort of like caught in the middle of a conversation. If we want to interrupt someone, there are some expressions that I can use. Notice here that we have 6 expressions and they vary in the level of formality. What we have to do here is we can just choose 3. You can choose a formal one, an informal, and a neutral one. And one that is going to be also adequate for the level of our students. The more basic the learner is, the simpler the expression has to be. If we have students already with an advanced level that they can communicate without hesitation, then they can use a longer expression. But remember, recycling is the key. Try to encourage the students to use these expressions as much as they can. Choose 2 of your favorite ones and try to do it, let's say, for 1 week. For 1 week, you will be practicing interrupting together with the other material that you already have. And then you just adapt these clues. At the end of the week, you will see how the students are performing, and you can make a report on how well or badly accepted these expressions are, or if they are really helping in the purpose of communication. It is very important to be aware of when the person is ready to give us a chance to speak. So sometimes it involves a quick movement of the eye, or maybe something with the face, but also once that little communication with gestures happens, then you're ready to accept the turn. In this case, I only took the ones that are the most common. So then again, choose 1 formal, 1 informal, and then try to get your students practice when they are accepting the turn. When you want to manage interruptions and you want to really make sure your idea doesn't escape your mind, then you have to use also some expressions that are going to help you keep in your turn. By using some of these expressions, you are going to signal the other speaker that you still have something else to say. So again, choose 1 and see how the students react to it. Or in 1 week, you work with interrupting, the next week by keeping a turn, and the next time by accepting the turn. You decide what is the best way to start introducing these ideas into your learners. Once the speaker has finished a turn, it is the turn of the other person to accept and sort of like keep on going so their turn is not taken away from them. So instead of using like in addition, they can use some of these expressions. These are more varied and there are a little bit more lexical. Therefore, be selective on the ones that are going to be good for the beginners. For example, before you reply or before you have your say, or I'm nearly finished will be basically better for beginners. But when you make your choice, try to stick to them and you say them as well so the students think that they are actually expressions that they can use and that they sound okay. Sometimes when you are accepting a turn and you're not quite ready to speak, you might try to shift the turn to another person. So that is, you accept your turn, but you notice that you're not ready with an idea, and then you shift it to someone else that is willing to say something. So here there's also a big variety of lexical and grammatical expressions. Once again, you may choose the one that will be more suitable for your learners. So once again, for a beginner, it will be like, please go ahead. You could even go a little bit funny and say, okay, age before beauty or ladies first. I mean, not necessarily you have to use these, but it will provide a little bit of sort of like the spice, and they don't feel that they are doing it so mechanically. But these are expressions that are absolutely okay in a colloquial conversation. So then your students can also try to use them. Once again, choose the ones that appeal for you best and then incorporate them into one of the lessons or one of the weeks that you want to do these automatic expressions or situations. Sometimes, when you want to give a person an opportunity for a longer term, and because you have noticed specifically that the person is a bit shy and they don't have maybe a lot to say, you can invite them to give more information about an idea or to elaborate more on an idea because they only have monosyllabic responsives. So instead of ignoring the person, invite them to say a little bit more, and you can use some of these expressions. Basically, for beginners, again, you can say, do you agree, or do you think, or do you have an opinion on this? By nominating also the student, they might feel on the spot, but it would actually give them an idea on how to participate actively in the conversation. And then it comes at end of your turn. You don't have any more to say. Your ideas have really run dry, and you're ready to say, okay, that's the end of it. But there are also some mechanical answers that they can learn to say. And one of my favorites is, that's all I want to say. But obviously, there are people that also fancy, etc., etc. And that would also signal the other speaker that you really are done. And by the other person jumping into the conversation will not be taken as an intruder, because the person, by saying these expressions, has already ended the turn. What is the aim of these activities now? The aim is to actually notice how people interact in real conversations. So you're going to watch a video, and this video is a very short conversation of two people in a bar. What you have to do is to find out how interactive the conversation is, who has the longer terms, who has the shorter terms, what kind of gestures or non-communicative signals the person is using to hold the floor or to give an opportunity to the other speaker to say something. So once you have listened to this conversation, seen the conversation a few times, Make a list of the key expressions. Perhaps they're not the same as we have covered in the presentation, but there might be others that might help you students use this correctly. So watch the video and make a list. You will have to keep this list close to you when you are ready to grade your students as well. So in other words, when you are ready to do a task with your students, you will have to do the same. It will be like you're watching a video and you are grading and you are evaluating how well the students are holding the floor, keeping their turn, or giving their turn to another person, or rather than the turns are balanced instead of that the dominant student is taking most of the time speaking. So you wonder, what is next in our conversation classes? Well, the whole idea of this is that you introduce these automatic responses, that you give them a use, that you introduce them to your students, and basically that you evaluate the benefits of it. Obviously, you might consider that these are really not beneficial at all, but then you have to provide a reason for that. So once you have tried for a month, let's say by the end of November, we will have to get together and you will have to finish a report on how your students accepted or used these expressions. So the first week, you are going to introduce new phrases to your students and evaluate how easy or difficult it is for them to use them. Make sure that you write on your report the expressions that you chose and that you are doing, you are counting or you are evaluating really how effective these were for a certain level of students. So if you are in a conversation club with beginners, so you're going to say, okay, these expressions were good for beginners or really not good for beginners, and you're going to tell the reason why. As at the same time, if these were not really beneficial for them, you have to evaluate on your own how the contributions might be enhanced. So maybe by really ignoring these lexical grammatical expressions and then using others, or maybe by just doing gestures. But remember, when you are going to give a new one, try to explain why do you think it's a better one, or why do you think it will work better for your students. You have to send this report to my email at the end of the month, or perhaps for our next meeting we will have this ready and we can share other ideas to make these conversation classes work for all of us. Thank you for your attention. I hope that this presentation will actually help you improve and standardize our conversation clubs. In our next meeting, we are going to be evaluating the can-do statements for the different levels, the A1, A2, B1, and B2. So don't lose hope and do your best. Remember as well, if you need any other information or if you need more activities or games or role plays, feel free to contact me to this email and I'll make sure you get more copies as soon as I get your email. Have fun and let's talk.